Awesome. Thank you, Corey. Thanks to all for joining. Looking forward to talking about ISO 27701 today and presenting our introduction. So what we're going to do today, first talk about what is ISO 27701, the business case, and we'll get into steps to achieving compliance, what the typical timeline is, who needs to be involved, and a little bit about the framework. All right, so what is ISO 27701? Hopefully, a lot of you are familiar with ISO, the International Standards Organization. It created the 27701 standard back in 2019. It defines the requirements for a privacy information management system and adds to that portfolio, adds to the 27,000 series. So to that end, ISO is an international standard, so it's used by companies worldwide. For an ISO program, you have an annual audit over a defined scope, and you, as the company getting certified, define your scope. When you complete an ISO 27701 audit by a qualified organization, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. You do obtain an ISO 27701 certification. It is important as a starting point to understand you also have to obtain ISO 27001 certification in order to receive 27701. 27001, of course, is the information security management system. Goes in detail on information security. So 27701 expands that to include privacy. So there are really a few components listed on the screen to the 27701 standard. The first, clause 5, is the privacy information management system, or you'll hear it referred to most often as the PIMS. So this builds off of the management system requirements of ISO 27001. So those are classically known as clauses 4 through 10 of 27001. What 27701 does is it says it's a starting point. If you're looking at 27001, anytime it refers to information security, those references should be replaced with a reference to information security and privacy. So that's the base of the change to the PIMS, and then there's further guidance on some of the specific clause elements. Clause 6 of 27701, this expands the implementation guidance for the ISO 27001 Annex A controls. So from those 14 categories, 114 controls, etc., there are 31 that have a specific expansion for privacy. And all that's outlined in clause 6. And then clauses 7 and 8 describe the specific privacy controls for controllers, which is clause 7, or processors, which is clause 8. So clauses 7 and 8 provide the detailed implementation guidance. Then Annex A and Annex B just list out the controls. So what we have here, you have to implement those controls in order to achieve your 27701 certification. Again, there's a separate set of controls for controllers and processors. We'll talk later on about what is contained within each. So now, why do ISO 27701? What's the business case? There are a few that we commonly see. The first, building a better privacy risk management program. I'd argue this is really the goal of any ISO standard, is to build a better risk management program in that particular domain. So 27701, through the management system requirements, guides you on overseeing your program, performing risk assessments, tracking results, and operating the program and achieving continual improvement. So that's a big goal, especially as you just see additional privacy regulation coming down. This is a great standard to allow you to better intake those regulations and manage a unified program. Next area, customer trust and due diligence. Particularly right now, I'd say this standard is just over 3 years old. We're still in an early adoption period. So the organizations that are going out and achieving the certification already are really able to demonstrate to their customers the importance they place on privacy. Shows, you feel confident in your program, you have external validation of what you've put in place, and ideally help you shorten your sales cycle, reduce due diligence burdens from potential customers around privacy. In addition, so international recognition and GDPR alignment. So like we mentioned up top, ISO is international organization. The standards are well respected and known across the globe. And the 27701 standard specifically is designed in a lot of ways to align with the GDPR. Has very good coverage. There's an annex in the standard that actually maps the different controls to the various GDPR clauses. It's not full GDPR certification. Don't want there to be any confusion on that, but it brings you into line with a lot of the control activities that would be required for a GDPR program. So rapid framework adoption globally. I did go looking for the statistics on how many organizations have certified to 27701, but unfortunately it wasn't in the most recent ISO survey that I could find. And I can tell just anecdotally, we're seeing just increased demand year over year for ISO 27701. We've seen, for example, Microsoft is accepting 27701 certifications in lieu of going through their supplier data protection requirements assessment. So with a company like that pushing it, that's just helping to drive adoption. And then the 27701 standard as an add-on to ISO 27001 just, I think, makes it a little easier for a company that's an ISO shop to say, okay, we're already doing 27001. What does the lift look like to get to 27701 since we've already gone through this ISMS process and built out that program? So there's certainly benefit there if you're already compliant with 27001. So to walk through the ISO ecosystem and all the different parties involved, the very base here, so organizations like your own that are looking to be certified to, let's say ISO 27701. So you are the audited entity. You have consulting companies like Risk 360. So Risk 360, we can provide consulting and readiness and preparation. We do not actually perform certifications to 27701 or any ISO standard. Those certifications are given by what's called certification bodies. So separation is required between any consulting implementation and the company that's actually doing the audit. There's a directory of accredited certification bodies. Certification bodies is a technical term for those that do the external audit. So as an example, we have the ANAB, directory linked there in the slide. And then with ISO, it goes further up beyond the certification bodies. So those are accredited by what are known as accreditation bodies. The two primary ones that we see are ANAB and UCAS, and they actually oversee the management programs that certification bodies have over their audit programs. So we say they actually audit the auditor. Then the ISO standards address requirements for really all of the below. Okay, so let's jump into what is in the 27701 framework. As with any ISO standard, the framework starts with the management system. So 27701 extends the ISMS requirements from 27001, specifically extends them to privacy. We call it here ISMS/PIMS. Tell you almost all companies that we're working with are combining these into what they call an integrated management system, or IMS. I think the IMS really reflects that the security and privacy programs are functioning together, working together to manage risk around system design, data collection, data processing. And it's really reflective of the level of coordination between the two functions. So the clauses do come from ISO 27001, starting with context of the organization, who are the interested parties in you obtaining a certification, what's the scope, that moves into leadership. So how leadership is describing its commitment to security and privacy, including its policy, appropriate roles within the organization. Planning gets into the risk assessment. So for 27701, the risk assessment activities should specifically include privacy, should include a privacy impact assessment or some kind of analysis of the effects to data subjects of risks to the organization and risks based on the processing performed. In this clause, you also see the requirement to define your objectives around information security and privacy, and determine how you're going to measure progress against those objectives. Clause 7, which is support, it's primarily about resources assigned to the program, their competence, training required. It also gets into the documentation that supports the program and how the program is going to be communicated internally and externally. Clause 8, operations, just gets into a little more detail around the risk assessment and how changes are made based on the risk assessment. And clauses 9 and 10 are about measurement activities for the program, communication to management, and ultimately corrective action and continual improvement of the security and privacy programs. Whenever we talk about ISO 27001 and 27701, I think it's important to just state that your attention usually goes to what are the controls that are required for this particular standard, making sure that you know how you're going to meet the controls. But a huge portion of the certification audits are actually on the management system. So this portion, what you're seeing on screen, it's depending on your size, a day of auditing or more just around what your management system looks like and how you've implemented it. So certainly don't want to lose sight of that when you're thinking about obtaining a ISO certification. All right, so the next section that I want to cover in 27701 is Annex A and the controller-specific controls within the framework. So it starts with conditions for collection and processing. So in the case of the controller, it is documenting your purpose and lawful basis for processing, obtaining consent, performing privacy impact assessments, developing joint controller arrangements as applicable, maintaining records of processing activity, really all the things that are kind of preconditions to actually engaging in data collection and data processing. 7.3, obligations to PII principles. So this primarily deals with data subject rights, your process is to respond to data subject requests, but also privacy notices, when those are communicated, what's communicated within them, and also your disclosures around automated decision making, for example, but mostly as a controller, what controls do you have in place when you're dealing directly with data subjects or PII principles, and what are the controls to make sure that you're affording the proper rights and have the proper disclosures in place. Section 7.4 is probably the most technical piece of the standard. So where it starts is limitation of collection, limitation of processing, data minimization, data de-identification. So areas that can get fairly technical around how you're achieving data minimization, how you're performing de-identification to the extent those apply to you. And then the last few controls deal more with data handling. So secure communication, retention, disposal, and also tracking and deletion of temporary files specifically. So all of the things really during processing to continue to maintain privacy in the data lifecycle. Then finally, section 7.5, the sharing, transfer, and disclosure of PII. So what's communicated to customers about how their PII may be shared or transferred, and how do you communicate those changes and make the right disclosures and communications to data subjects. And then Annex B is the processor-specific controls related to the framework. So if you notice, the headings are actually the same, but the controls themselves are modified to reflect the relationship with the controller rather than a direct relationship with data subjects. So to that end, in 8.2, you see like requirements to obtain the controller's permission for any advertising and marketing use of PII provided by the controller, having appropriate agreements in place with the controller, processing only based on the controller's written instructions, handling infringing instructions from the customer. Again, everything kind of set up based on the relationship with the controller, but again, making sure that within the processor's ecosystem, there are controls in place to make sure that only approved and legal processing is being conducted. Obligations to PII principles. This is the simplest section in the framework. Just one control to make sure as a processor you have appropriate mechanisms to assist data controllers with their obligations to PII principles. 8.4 is also fairly small, privacy by design and privacy by default. So in the case of a processor, it's communicating your policy on retention and disposal to the customer, having mechanisms to delete the PII upon request, secure communication again, and also management and deletion of temporary files. Then finally, PII sharing, transfer, and disclosure. It gets a little more detailed on the processor side, actually. So here you get into cross-border transfers, disclosure of your sub-processors, management of additions or changes to the list of sub-processors, disclosures based on legal subpoena, and working with the customer to handle those. So it's actually a more expansive section, just dealing with more scenarios around how a processor might be disclosing PII or be requested to disclose PII that's processed on the controller's behalf. All right, so that's our run through the framework. Now let's talk about implementation. So the first step in the exercise is planning. Biggest question anytime we deal with an organization looking to go through 27701 is, are you looking to certify as a controller, a processor, or both? So in the planning process, that's a chance to talk through your reasons for certification, your business drivers, and what customers and interested parties are expecting from the certification process. Here we also identify stakeholders, and make sure that we understand exactly what we're looking to achieve through the process. There we jump into the current state assessment. So when we perform the initial current state assessment, that also satisfies the internal audit requirement going into your initial certification audit. But here we'll conduct a series of walkthroughs, go through the PIMS, go through all the in-scope controls, and assess whether or not those are met. From there, we will work with you on a remediation roadmap. So based on the gaps, we'll work to develop action plans, assign owners and due dates to those action plans, and then take a step back, look at all the activities that are required, the resources needed to complete those activities, and make sure that the due dates and the owners look right to meet your timeline. From there, go into program implementation. So putting pen to paper and getting the gaps that were identified in the current state assessment resolved. So once you're through implementation, you can think about the certification process. So there are really 4 steps here. Planning in the certification process. 1, choosing which certification body is going to perform the audit. There's a letter of application that needs to be submitted that certification body will usually provide, making sure the timing is right on the external audit. All that during the planning process. What's called a stage 1 audit. Like I mentioned, the external audits focus heavily on the PIMS or integrated management system. So in the stage 1 audit, most of it will be just looking at your PIMS, verifying at a slightly higher level that you've really implemented a PIMS. This is something that's actually, an organizational initiative led by top management, and you've gone through, the key elements of a risk assessment, PIMS documentation, the internal audit. So it's a check to make sure you're ready for the full audit, which is stage 2. So stage 2 for a 27701 audit is not super lengthy. It is, I should say, it's definitely a smaller standard than 27001. So not nearly as much time required in the stage 2 audit. It's usually half a day to 1 day for stage 2. But in stage 2, the auditor will obtain and review evidence related to the operation of all those controls. They'll also walk through the PIMS again and maybe request some deeper documentation just to make sure you can fully support that you've implemented everything you committed to in the PIMS. Again, for 27701, not as much burden as you might see in a 27001 audit. And ultimately, the auditor makes a certification decision based on what has been seen in the stage 2 audit. So stage 2 audit is actually where major or minor nonconformities are determined. Anything found in stage 1, you typically have time to fix between stage 1 and stage 2. But based on any nonconformities found, the auditor will make a certification decision. And from there, assuming you pass, it's usually a couple of weeks just to finalize documentation and ultimately obtain your certificate. So looking at everything together, for 27701, it's usually around a 6-month process from first engaging to completing your stage 2 audit. So pretty much right away, we'll begin with a planning and the current state assessment. Once we're through the current state assessment, there's some you can really start before we're even through that. But there's a block for remediation, which can take a few months. Usually, we see companies 4 to 6 months to actually get through all their remediation efforts, and then you go into your stage 1 audit with your certification body. 30 to 60 days later, you'll go through stage 2 and complete your certification audit. So we wanted to present an idea of who's impacted by the ISO 27701 audit. So the first category, leadership, those who are really governing the PIMS and the privacy program. Most of the involvement will be walkthroughs. There's typically some evidence like communication to an audit committee or the highest level of management that only a subset of individuals have access to. So we need some assistance in gathering that, redacting that, and providing it to us. We do see legal as really the primary stakeholder in most cases. So there's a decent time block going through walkthroughs. Walkthroughs budget 5 to 10 hours just for walkthroughs, and then additional time to gather evidence off of, coordinating with others across the business, managing the program. And then security and engineering, this is a smaller commitment, but there's also going to be some specific evidence like around temporary files where you need subject matter experts to pull that evidence together. Beyond that, it really varies by the organization. There may be others who are specialists just in data subject request, so they'll typically need to be involved for a walkthrough and gathering some evidence. But these are really the groups that we primarily deal with. Yep, so with that, I'm through with the overview. I hope that you guys have had a chance to submit some questions. Definitely would like to spend a good bit of time on questions. Or if we have any.
Yeah, Phil, we actually have several. So the first question is, what differences are there in ISO 27701 and SOC 2 privacy points of focus? And then the second part is, are there any cross mapping for the two frameworks?
Yeah, so I can answer the second part first. I have not seen a mapping between SOC 2 and 27701. That is a really good idea. Yeah, I'd say similarities. I'd say the SOC 2, I think, is a little more controller focused. So I'd say there's a good bit of similarity if you are a controller. If you're a processor, 27701 will probably have more relevant guidance for you. But the SOC 2 does cover notice, data subject request, subprocessors and data sharing, touches on retention and disposal, touches on like data minimization. So there's a fair bit of overlap on the controller side, at least. The 27701 framework is also, I'd say, just a little more prescriptive about exactly what it's looking for on some of those items.
Okay, we have another question. If someone is ISO 27001 certified, how much effort is required to integrate with 27701? And like, what are like the high-level steps they would have to do to combine the two efforts?
Mm-hmm. Yep, great question. So efforts, I jump back to the kind of the timeline here. We do deal more often with organizations that already are 27001 compliant. So this remediation timeline is taking that into effect, or taking it into account. The key question for integration is, what is the overlap between security and privacy? So we know privacy requires security. Hopefully the two pieces are already talking, but operationally, how closely or how similarly are they managed? So we have seen larger organizations where they're really in different silos, and it didn't make as much sense to have an integrated management system. It's okay. Ultimately, the requirements are in the standard, and you can have different processes to meet those requirements. So if it's going to be the same body that's already working effectively on 27001, that's a good thing. It can make remediation a little easier. That's a very big step. Performing the risk assessment and specifically considering privacy, looking at all the risks and determining if there's a privacy component to any of the security risks. It's another key component of really integrating the two standards. Yeah, I'd say it really revolves around the management system and how prepared you are to have security and privacy working together, or what that management structure is going to look like for a combined program.
Okay, Phil, we got several more.
Okay.
Will the external auditor perform both the ISO 27001 and the 27701 audits at the same time?
Generally, yes. They're trying to think for sure. I believe, I'm not remembering 100%. I believe we've had clients who kind of added on 27701 out of band, but most are, they've gone through 27001 1 or 2 years, and then going into the next audit, they're adding 27701. And you can look at the qualifications of the firm that's currently performing your 27001 audit. So that would be in like the ANAB directory that was linked earlier. We'll say if the firm you're working with has been certified to perform 27701 audits. And we typically see our clients using the same auditor for both. Most firms have gone ahead and added 27701 to their capabilities if they're already doing 27001 certifications.
Okay, we have another one from Michael Carroll. If a cloud-based organization has ISO 27001 certification, as a next step, would you recommend they add on 27018 or 27701 or both?
I think ISO is pushing organizations toward 27701. So 27018 was initially the privacy add-on for 27001. 2718 didn't and doesn't require a management system around privacy, doesn't require privacy risk assessment, but similar to Annex A and B, it outlines control considerations for the ISO 27001 Annex A controls, as well as specific guidance for PII protection in the cloud. Pretty much all those controls have been moved into 27701. There's a mapping within one of the annexes for 27701 that tells you exactly which controls from the 27018 are now in 27701. But I believe ISO is looking to move organizations to 27701 in a full privacy management system.
Okay, we have another question. Are there any additional resources available on this topic from MIS 360?
Yes, absolutely. So if you, Corey, you might be the best to answer this one. If you go to our YouTube channel, I know we've put a few links out there, or a few videos out there on 27701. Our website, I believe it's risk360.com/whitepaper, has our full library of white papers, including all our 27701 work. What else? We have a privacy learning center on the website.
We actually have a lot of resources. Phil has been running our privacy content for a very long time. He's put together several videos on ISO 27701. We have a white paper that's really good. People love to download. Actually, I'll send in the recap email, I'll send out the link to the white paper. So if you're interested in download it, you can. We also have like a whole video series on GDPR and I think the California Privacy Acts as well. So we'll make sure you guys get that link in the follow-up email. It'll be coming out tomorrow. Also with the video, if you want to share with your colleagues or rewatch it. We actually have one, let me make sure this is one last question. Nobody else had anything else? Yeah, we have one last question. Do you suggest any software that can help manage this for my business?
Yeah, that's a great question. Software tools can definitely be helpful. It depends on the pain you're feeling though. So if you're getting a lot of data subject requests and having trouble handling those, automating those, tracking those, there are some good platforms out there for that. The other big area is the records of processing activities or Article 30 records. We see companies having some pain there and leveraging software tools. So if you're to that point, a software tool can definitely be a good investment. Sometimes I do caution organizations, especially on the data subject requests side. In my experience, there are some organizations that just deal with these in huge numbers, and there are also a lot of organizations that really don't receive a lot of these. So again, if you're feeling the pain on data subject requests, then it may be a worthwhile investment, but I'd make sure you're feeling the pain before going after a software tool for it. But yeah, there are definitely good tools out there. I think they're pretty well known. We've seen them have a lot of benefit for companies where they're to the scale or they just have a lot of complexity in their processing operations.
Yeah, well, Phil, that's actually the last question. I did want to let you guys know that we have a free GRC tool if you're into ISO 27001 called Phalanx. So you go to phalanxgrc.com. We actually have a free tier if you're not already on there. So that's the plug I'm going to put in there for marketing today. So thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. You guys have a great day.